Welcome to the TA Disruptors podcast. I'm Robert Montouri, CEO and co-founder of Arctic Shores, the task-based assessment company that helps companies uncover potential and see more in people. In this podcast, I have the honour and privilege of talking to TA practitioners, thought leaders, and even psychometric experts. And today I am especially excited and pleased to be welcoming two psychometric experts, both of who work for Arctic Shores, Dr. Luke Montouri, Senior Psychometrician, and Sanchia Dennis, Applied Psychologist. Welcome to the podcast. Why don't you just give us a little bit of background about what you do and your expertise in this field before we get going? First of all, you, Luke.
So I, as you said, senior psychometrician at Arctic Shores. A lifetime ago, I did a PhD in behavioural neuroscience, sort of looking at how we can use behaviours to make inferences about sort of intentions in animals. Moved into industry at some point to work in psychometrics, and then not long after that found in Arctic Shores the perfect blend of those two sorts of worlds. So the sort of use of behaviour to determine what's going on in someone's brain, and the use of psychometrics to sort of measure that in an accurate kind of way.
Yeah, quite an unusual blend, that sort of behavioural and the psychometrics piece. So quite a unique set of skills in some way that you brought together there. Brilliant, thank you. And Sanchia, tell us.
Thank you for having me on.
Yes, you're most welcome.
So my background, I did my psychology undergrad. Really enjoyed it. I've always been really fascinated by people and obviously just the way we think and how that then reflects in our behaviour and the way we are. Yes. I decided to specialise in occupational psychology for my master's. I just thought, we spend so much time at work that to do that research is just really interesting to look at people, how they interact at work and everything like that. So that's kind of where I started. And then coming out of my master's, I always had, like I said, quite an interest in personality. I did a bit of that for my master's dissertation. And so when I found Arctic Shores, I was just really interested by the approach that was taken, like with the task-based assessment. I thought it was so new and fresh and I'd never seen anything like it. I didn't even know it existed. That really got me energised and interested in joining the company.
Well, you're both significantly more qualified than me in this sort of field of psychometrics. I am fascinated by it and obviously enjoyed setting up a business 10 years ago now to think about how we might uncover potential. But I've always admired the experts and the evidence and the science behind how we've gone about developing task-based assessments, and it's such a unique way to understand about personality. And many people struggle with that different approach to it. But also at the same time, there's been a lot of change in the workplace too. So before we changed our model, did you do some, between the two of you, I suppose, did you do some research into what were other people saying about the way that the world of work was going to require from people in order to be successful in doing the different types of jobs? Because we've got a huge amount of digitization, we now have generative AI, so future requirements of what we're going to need from people will be different from the past. So how did you go about looking at some of the academic research around that, and what did you discover from that?
Yeah, so as you've just said, huge changes in the workplace happening, and we know that what we're measuring now might not necessarily be relevant for the future, and we wanted to make sure that our assessment is obviously keeping up with that changing workplace demand. So this initiated a comprehensive review of our assessment and our tasks to make sure that what we are measuring is going to remain relevant and important for the future of work. So this included sort of our own original research, sort of thought leadership research, which I think, Luke, you will sort of get onto in just a second. And then we also used obviously the vast amount of data that we have to create a very strong evidence-based foundations to then explore maybe new measures or how we can sort of evolve and further develop our current assessment. I don't know if you wanted to go into a bit more detail about the more thought leadership thematic analysis.
I think I would. I think I love talking about this. I mean, you say the world of work is changing, but the world of work has always been changing.
Yes, that's true.
It's not. I mean, this has been a conversation for years, and so it's probably not unfamiliar to many people that we embarked on a series of literature reviews that would tell us something about what we need to be doing to be prepared for that future.
Yes.
And so we went through some of the thought leadership that was being put out by organizations like Deloitte, McKinsey. The World Economic Forum has lots of reports, yearly reports on sort of labor trends. The National Foundation for Education Research is a particular favorite of mine. They have an initiative at the moment called the 2035 Skills Imperative. Okay. They're looking at what we need to be doing in education for the next 10 years to be training people. What skills are going to be important in the future of work, and how do we train people? And so we took all of those pieces of research and we sort of were looking for commonalities between them. We took as Sanchia said, the data that we have, but then also a lot of the data that we have from clients, such as competency frameworks, looking at what in the competency frameworks was already reflecting the changes that we were expecting to see about the future of work. So really taking as many different views of it as we could. What is everyone saying about the future? What are we already seeing about what the future holds? And where are we either well placed for it or not as well placed for it? And what do we need to do to change that?
So from that sounds, a really thorough approach. And so we've sort of taken the time after 10 years to get the data and be more confident and about the things that we measure and being able to describe it in our own terms and models rather than within the confines of the 5-factor model. But we didn't just stop there. We actually went out to see what people wanted to be measured, what they were talking about, how things were changing as well. And so then combining those things together, we've then come up with a new model that's evidence-based on those three areas that I suppose you were saying, our own data on this, what we were seeing from engagements with clients that we've had over the years, plus then what leading organisations like the World Economic Forum were talking about too. That's quite a bold thing to do to be able to break out from existing frameworks there. Although interestingly, I see quite a few organisations starting to do that. You've got, I saw recently SHL have now talked about 12 universal skills. We have, I think, the Universal Skills Framework, which is a UK government-backed body that says there are 8. So there seems to be a lot of new models coming out at the moment to reflect this future. Where did we end up and why?
So we ended up, we found the commonalities between those areas and what we were seeing with our own data. And what we saw was relatively simple. There are 3 broad families of skill enabler that will be relevant for the future. As long as humans are involved in work, at some point, regardless of the technological changes that are going on, people are going to need 3 things, really. They'll need interpersonal skills.
We're all working with other people, so clearly.
I mean, some of this isn't rocket science.
Yes.
Interpersonal skills, the ability to think, and many things come under that, problem solving, decision making, and whatever else we can think of that fits under there. Many of the skills that you described from other organizations probably fit under there. And then also self-management skills. So to what extent are you able to direct your own behaviors to achieve goals, inhibit responses that might not be appropriate given a context? These three broad overarching categories.
I liked your term on that, skill enablers, on this, because there is a lot of confusion around what is a skill, and you have hard skills and soft skills, and hard skills we all seem to understand as technical skills, and soft skills now are suddenly a bit more confusing, because is something like curiosity a skill, or is it a personality trait? But actually, when you were describing those three broad families, and I really like the term skill enablers on this, those are the things that I suppose everybody's going to need to some degree or another, and there'll be different weightings across those three broad areas, but that will enable them to then pick up the skills that we're talking about, and whether that be a leadership skill or a negotiation skill, or it may be a software programming skill or a project management skill, will have elements of what's your thinking style, how do you like to organize yourself, and how do you interact with others. And those were the three. Did you end up with those three, or that was just the research from our own research was naturally pointing to those three? And did you start off with, did you come across 4 or 5, and then, or was it just naturally when you were working through all of this, it became really clear there are just these 3?
So it was actually really clear. The research was pretty broadly in agreement. Everyone differed a little bit in how they described these categories and what they put in these categories, and so they had different focuses depending on the context. Obviously, McKinsey is going to have a different focus to the National Foundation for Education Research.
Yes.
There was also, a lot of them had a 4th category, which tended to be something like digital literacy or technical skills.
Yes.
And this varied far more than what we were seeing. And we weren't particularly interested in including this because technical skills are the kind of thing that we're seeing constantly change. And we're not interested in sort of trying to figure out what skill is going to be relevant for the next year.
Yes.
We want to know what is an enduring human characteristic that is something that we can measure, that will be relevant for a long period of time.
Yes. And actually, you make a great point on that. That's I suppose the point of a skill enabler on this is that we will be constantly refreshing our hard skills, or any type of skill that we might have to be successful in the workplace, because it's constantly changing. Actually, the pace of change is faster, it's more technically driven than it has been in the past. And so those underlying human characteristics that enable you to adapt and to learn, refresh, acquire new skills are going to be the things that we want to know about, rather than specifically, you've got this skill, you can test that in different ways, and actually you may not even worry about testing it, because it's going to change within quite short period of time within the workplace anyway.
And just to sort of support that a little bit, we started this research end of 2022. This is all before ChatGPT became a widespread phenomenon. Since ChatGPT has come out, it appears as if this way of categorizing skills or skill enablers has only become more relevant. So with the release of ChatGPT and people using AI-enabled tools more and more frequently, it seems like interpersonal skills, self-management skills, and ability to think for yourself and make decisions is more relevant. They are more relevant than ever.
Yes. Yeah, you're quite right. And I think the interesting thing for me about the development of Gen AI is, lots of people talk about, are we going to lose a lot of jobs because of Gen AI's come out? Actually, I just think for me, it's like the calculator. The human interaction with Gen AI is just going to mean that we can do different things. And in many ways, it will enable people, certainly my optimistic view of it is that if you haven't necessarily had the training or the background to do what previously has been a high-level knowledge role, and therefore you're excluded from that, now you can come in and have ChatGPT as a tool that gets you up to that knowledge base as somebody else really, really quickly. And so I do see some really nice positive things from that development too. But Sanchia, you've been obviously working a lot in this too, in supporting this kind of development, and thank you for sharing that, Luke. Are you able to give us a bit more detail about those skill enablers then, and those families, and what they actually mean? It's nice just to come up with general broad terms, but
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, how do they break down?
I think, well, that's going to be ironic, starting with the thinking
Yes.
skill enabling family. So this sort of encompasses things like your curiosity, creativity, your ability to make decisions and problem solve and these types of things. And so I think through our assessment, we're able to really get to the core of, how is someone processing something and then coming up with, a response in line with these sort of, I guess you could call them behaviours, tendencies, abilities. And I think these are the things that someone possesses and then they can grow and develop them into skills. People always say, oh, we want someone with critical thinking skills that can make really good decisions. And so I think we're able to really measure that in a person. And that's something that someone has, now and can present in the future and further develop. So that's thinking style.
And so just on that, a lot richer then than the old way. Luke referred to earlier the traditional view of you had personality and you had ability, and I'd say never the two shall meet, but they were two separate categories. Whereas what you're describing here is, oddly enough, I think what we all probably feel intuitively is how we bring our whole self to the workplace. It's not just a case of, I'm good at numerical reasoning. Actually, it's the way I problem solve. It's the way that I process information. So I suppose what you're sharing there is a much richer perspective of the thinking style we bring to the workplace than just a straight intelligence style cognitive ability or IQ style.
Yeah, and I think we kind of see that a little bit already when we look at like openness to experience. That's kind of always been very closely linked to intelligence. That sort of intellectual engagement and that curiosity to learn more about something, and so that's always kind of been there. It's almost just not been tapped into enough, and that realization of that's probably because personality and cognitive ability are so closely
intertwined, exactly, rather than separate.
Yeah, it's the way we're perceiving things in our environment. Our brain is processing things and producing responses. That's at the core of it, really.
Yes.
But then obviously through like the Big Five, we've obviously added a lot of language around that and descriptions, more of the behaviour side. And so then I think this segregation's happened between the two. But yeah, I think with the thinking skill enabling family, it's kind of bringing that together. I mean, across all of the skill enabling families really, but I think thinking where it is a little bit more about the problem solving and the critical thinking, which is always typically associated with intelligence.
Yes.
Kind of just bringing that personality element in as well.
Nice. So that's the first one.
So that's the first one, yeah. So then we've got interacting with others. So as Luke said, that's something that's not going to change. People want people that can interact well with others.
Yes.
And within this skill enabling family, this is all about, how someone can perceive emotions in others to then, understand the nuances of a situation and respond in the right way back in, social situations and building interpersonal relationships and these types of things. So I think you could probably link this with, like I've just said, interpersonal skills, but also I think in a leadership sort of role, like leadership skills as well. I think being able to, communicate effectively is really important. And I think a big part of that is being able to pick up on the nuances in, the situation, how someone's responding to what you've said, adapting your behaviour appropriately to get, a desired outcome, which would be building a good relationship or,
And I think you make a very interesting point there, Sanchia, about, adapting your behaviour as to how you might lead or influence people, because that's been a massive change in the last few years. When I think back when I started many moons ago in the workplace, I never saw leaders adapting their behaviour to what people expected or needed or required in order to be successful. It was, this is what I tell you, you do. And I think that leadership style has completely changed, and therefore leadership has to be much more nuanced to accept that. Is that part of, I suppose, why you think this is going to be really important?
Definitely. I think being attuned to how your actions impact other people around you is so important.
Yes.
And so I think with interacting with others, that's what we're trying to get at really, is how are you able to recognize people around you, respect different perspectives, respect how your actions are affecting other people, and then behave in a way that, is going to be constructive and, promote team morale and proactivity in the right way. So,
and I suppose when some people will be thinking about this too, about interacting with others, there are some jobs where you don't have to interact with others. So how will that work in this model then? Will you is the way that we're thinking about this, that there'll be some things that we'll want to put more significance to, and actually if a role, you can be a software developer and not actually have to interact with people other than through Slack, and that's perfectly acceptable, and it won't change your performance in the role. So yeah, how might that work in roles where actually interacting with others may not be important?
I guess that's why we have 3 skill enabling families. Is I don't think we're trying to say that you need elements of all of these things to be good at your job. I think it is role specific. So
yes.
Some skill enabling families will be a lot more relevant for certain roles, like
yes.
you said, like a software developer. Things in the thinking category or the self-management
might be more
family might be more appropriate. Yeah, so
yes.
I don't think it's the case that you need all of it.
Okay.
I think it's about picking and choosing what is most relevant for performance in the role.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So tell me about the third one then, the last one.
Yes, so we have self-management, which is the third skill-enabling family. And this is all about your ability to sort of control your emotions and your thoughts and how that can help you remain focused on what you're doing. It's also about your ability to, overcome challenges, cope in those more pressurised situations maybe, and how you deal with that.
Yes.
And then also your flexibility and your ability to sort of adapt to different demands or, switch what you're doing to focus on something else. No,
that makes a lot of sense. And I can really... particularly in the hybrid world that we work in now, where everybody has much more of a choice of what suits them in their style of working. But equally, that ability to, even if you're not in an environment in an office and you're working from home, your ability to adapt, I suppose, to that different working environment, still stay focused, still get things done, means that actually that self-management piece is going to become much more important. In the past, it was just, well, you turn up in an office and you're expected to be productive by just being sat at a desk. It's much more nuanced now because of the different ways that we're working. And so understanding how somebody prefers to work and how that links to success in the role is going to be really important.
Yeah, and I think the complexity of roles as well.
True.
Having roles that might require you to shift between lots of different types of tasks, and they might be of different nature. You might be able, I guess people think of multitasking. I'm not necessarily talking about multitasking, but more being able to shift your sort of cognitive process from one task to maybe something that's quite different, and be able to do that quite seamlessly and effectively to then manage, complex projects and things like that as well. So I think self-management definitely
plays into that
for sure.
It does. Thank you for sharing those, and that's really interesting to understand a bit more about that. I suppose my final question around this, and maybe you first, Sanchia, and possibly you might want to chip in on this, but where does that leave us with the 5-factor model now? Because we talked at the beginning that that was the lens through which everybody understood personality and psychometrics. We've now done all this research. We've come up with the 3 skill enablers as a new type of model to be able to understand and predict performance in the workplace. And what's our feeling now and take on the 5-factor personality model?
So I think everything we've just said, we're definitely not disregarding the big 5-factor model. I think we respect it. It's got historical significance there in personality research, psychometrics,
yes,
and also in many applications, even our own. We kind of already said that we still use it to communicate what we're measuring in a way that most people are very familiar with and that's universal. So it definitely still has its value. I think we just stress the need to evolve from the big 5 in order to keep up with, changing workplace environments, the future of work, all of these technological shifts. So we do need to sort of move beyond that.
Yes.
So I think even when we look at our skill enabling model, we do still see elements of the big five reflected in, self-management, for instance.
Yes.
We see that overlap with neuroticism.
Okay.
And that ability to be, control your emotions and emotional stability. And so we definitely see that reflected through, the three skill enabling families. To give another example, I guess, interacting with others, that sort of being able to be considerate of others, consideration, compassion, that's probably more agreeableness.
Yes.
Could also touch upon extroversion, I guess, with, the interpersonal style.
Yes.
And being able to collaborate with others and teamwork and things like that. So I think that's still reflected through interacting with others. And then we kind of already said with thinking style, it's always been a bit intertwined with openness to experience as well, that curiosity piece and intellectual engagement and things like that. So I think our model is broad because we only have 3 categories. I think we're able to then encompass more. Obviously the big 5 has 5 factors, but it kind of gets absorbed within the model. But then alongside things like cognitive ability, which, as we've said, has always been treated quite separately and had its own models. So I think it's more bringing everything together.
Yes, there is another major part. So it's simplifying it, but it's also recognising that cognition, therefore thinking style, has a play in all of this, intertwined with the other things rather than just being separate.
The big 5 is a lens. It's a lens through which we can interpret people's behaviours, and it's a lens through which we have typically categorized the way in which we talk about the way in which people behave. But it is not the only way to understand behavior.
Yes.
There are other ways that haven't been talked about, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. And just on that sort of cognitive piece, have we reevaluated how we measure cognitive ability now? Because that for me is another area that hasn't had a lot of change for a long time. And I know that's a particular area of interest for you too as well. So yeah, share with us as to where do you think cognitive ability and how we understand it can and should be going?
And cognitive ability has always had sort of pride of place amongst the psychometric measures for a variety of reasons. I guess we, in this model, don't really put it on a pedestal in the same way. It is just another thing underneath the broad families. But it's one of those funny ones. It's a very funny one because it's historically been used because of its supposed validity, or its predictive validity, its ability to predict workplace performance very well. But obviously there are issues with it. It introduces it's a source of disparate impact in selection pipelines. It certainly degrades the candidate experience, which has some effect on some of these disparate impacts. And the predictive validity piece actually is currently under fire. So there are people discussing the extent to which it is actually predictive.
Or as predictive.
As predictive, yeah. You rightly point out it's really a question of how much rather than if it is at all. And I think we at Arctic Shores have the advantage of being able to look at this and say, right, how are we going to do this differently based on the fact that we use task-based assessments? And so, as you know, we recently, recently, it was about a year ago now, we revamped our cognitive ability solutions, and we use that as an opportunity to really sort of start exploring how we can do things differently through a task-based approach. And I think our abstract inductive reasoning task order is a good example of this. Traditional assessments like this, typically multiple choice, you select from one of multiple options, which is the correct answer.
And by the way, and one of those is meant to be a distractor, which I always find annoying because I always get caught out by the distractor.
You can do a lot of fancy things with which distractors are there and whatnot. But the problem with multiple choice in this context is that there's a large literature out there that shows things like people using different strategies to complete these tasks, right? So you can complete that task in one of two ways. You can look at the multiple choice questions the distractors and attempt to figure out which one is the right one. Or you can look at the puzzle and figure out what rules are determining the answer. That latter point is actually the one that we want to tap into more. It's the more sort of valid approach to the measurement of inductive reasoning in this context. And so for us, the solution was simple, to use what is referred to as a construction task, which allows people to actually fill in the puzzle the way in which they see fit. And it might seem like a simple change, but I think it really highlights some of the advantages of this sort of new approach, because all of a sudden everybody has to use the same strategy. So it's actually more valid than a multiple choice questionnaire. You have people, so it's not as working memory dependent, because now you're constructing the task as you see fit, rule by rule, element by element. You don't have to hold it all in your head at once. And you also get better data. So rather than what used to be a binary 0, 1, did you get it right in the time or not? It's a distribution of responses. Some people, if there are 10 possible correct responses to an item, some people will get 10, lots of people get 5, but you won't get zeros. You get a distribution of responses to each item. That's really interesting for us, because it gives us richer data with which we can potentially extract more insights about people. And it has lots of interesting future implications, because there's also a lot of research out there that shows that different rules and the extent to which, the preference that people might show towards particular rules might be an individual difference that is worth exploring.
Okay. Right.
And so I think this just illustrates that by taking the task-based approach, you can start to do things that are difficult to do if you sort of stay in a traditional world.
Yes. No, I really like that. And the bit that I remember when you and the team were first sort of presenting this as a way forward that I really liked was that it's effectively like we've done in education for some time, which is looking at people's workings out and giving them credit for the way that they come to an answer and as you say, construct or build that answer, rather than just that binary, did they get it right or wrong within that time frame. And if they just ran out of time by a fraction and then they get 0, you've just missed out a load of data about that person, that they were pretty close to it and they're not being given credit for it. So I know for me it was one of the highlights is being able to get a measurement of intelligence that was task based and move away completely from the old format. So an exciting development, and I know that there are other areas that you're looking at, maybe just quickly, because I know we're coming to the end of our time here, but you're interested in, I know, implicit learning too, and other ways that we use our intelligence, I suppose, to acquire skills or perform in the workplace.
Yeah, that's a particular interest of mine at the moment. Again, an advantage of the task-based approach, when we say we want to measure something, we don't just say, what has everyone else done? We get to say, well, why is that thing predictive? And so with cognitive ability, we did do some rethinking and we've gone down that path and we continue to go down that path. But we also say, okay, well, why is cognitive ability something that is interesting in the workplace? And the literature is clear. It's because it's a proxy for learning ability.
Right.
And because we're in the task-based world, we don't simply say, let's do a survey item that measures learning agility. We say, right, how do we build a task that measures individual differences in the ability to learn? And implicit learning is sort of the current world in which we're trying to build.
I'd like just to end up with something that's always been really important to me and interesting. When Saif and I set up Arctic Shores right at the beginning, nobody was giving candidate feedback automatically after they completed assessment. I still tell people that, and they find that extraordinary because now everybody does it. But when Saif and I started, if you wanted to get a feedback from doing a psychometric assessment, you had to be sat in front of somebody who had been certified by that psychometric provider, and it had to be done face to face because the language in it was so confusing or academically driven that they felt, only a trained person could possibly A, interpret it, and B, then explain it to the average person. So Saif and I just said, well, that's mad. Why do we just make the language simpler and help people understand it in a way that they're much more comfortable with, and then give everybody feedback that doesn't require training? So how have we evolved that too, and what does the new framework mean for that? Because giving people feedback about where they have good skill enablers and where things that that they feel they understand about themselves that they can help in their career journey, for me, is an incredibly important part of our work. So I know you've been working on this, Sanchia. So what changes have we done?
Yeah, so I'm very passionate about our candidate feedback, and it's something, like you've said, I've been working on over the last couple of months around the new skill enablers. I think it's really interesting to compare our type of feedback that we give with maybe other providers as well. Thinking of self-report again, it's all based on self-insight. Your perception of yourself and how you've responded in that assessment then will reflect sort of the feedback that you get. So I think it's very easy then to miss out on really important things about yourself that maybe you don't even recognise in yourself, because the feedback can be quite subjective in that sense. Yes. So I think with the nature of our tasks, because we're able to give a bit more of an objective view of a person, we can make that feedback really valuable, I hope, to all candidates, to then maybe realise potential in areas that they were not aware of, to then aid their development. I think part of understanding yourself more is so critical in then harnessing that, flourishing in something you're really good at, or maybe something that you might take a very different approach, just recognising that and then thinking, okay, how can I utilise this in the best way? So I think through our feedback, we've tried, again, not to categorise people as good at something, bad at something. I think that's just not very helpful for anyone. So instead, we've tried to recognise that, there is individual differences. People do take a different approach to things, and providing feedback that is constructive. If someone has taken a very different approach, giving some tips on how they can utilise that better, where someone is thriving and, it's a strength, it might be an untapped strength that they're not aware of, giving a few tips on, how that might play out in more applied behaviours that they might recognise that they do in the workplace or even in their everyday lives. So I think our main goal is to help candidates realise their potential and maybe even pursue careers that they might never have thought of. Not that our feedback is career focused, but I think it's so applicable across different contexts. When you read through the feedback, if we're saying that someone is, really great at, I don't know, like problem solving, like you're really good at interpreting data, or I think you can take that and then think, okay, I'm really good at this thing. Let me have a look at some careers that, where this is really valuable, and this is a requirement. So I really hope that the feedback that we've provided will support candidates in that professional development journey and personal development journey as well.
I'm sure it will, Sanchia, and all the more so for the careful thought that you've put into it as well. Well, thank you both. It's been fascinating talking to you. Lots of great insights in there, and been really brilliant understanding all the careful thought and hard work that you put into this new very exciting model, the skill enablers that we've got coming out. And it'll be interesting to see what the next decade brings for Arctic Shores. But thank you both.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.